All right, people. My next interview is with Nyx Melody. And once again, Nyx, thank you so much for saying yes when I showed up in your inbox. You have done this a few times. Once, the first time that we ever met, actually, it was your birthday, and I sang you happy birthday on an
Yes,
Instagram live. So just thanks for just showing up. I appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
of course. What I do, oh, I feel like that could be 20 minutes. Let's keep that short. So I'm primarily a licensed psychotherapist doing individual, group, and like relationship therapy work, oftentimes with gender expansive individuals, sexually expansive individuals, and people who practice polyamory or non-monogamy. I also offer clinical supervision to licensed and pre-licensed clinicians. I teach at NYU and Columbia in their master's programs, trying to create a better, more improved and inclusive therapy cohort to take my place in the future. I do consulting work on anti-oppression and as well as like LGBTQ related topics and issues, individual consultations, business consultations, and do a lot of trainings within these realms too. I do some writing on the side, but
Are you writing a
that's
book?
the brief.
Are you,
I'm not yet. I mean, I have enough information to write a book. Do you know a publisher?
I
Or an agent? Because hey.
I am writing a book. I have just started writing a book,
Yes.
and I'm going through a self-publisher the process sort of thing, not the actual like advance
Okay,
and that
okay,
kind of route. But
okay.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I can share my deeds for you. I was like, "Are you writing a book? Because your book would be fabulous." Okay, let's jump into this, and I want to ask you right from the jump. Because the point is for all our allies on the call, with Nyx's background and experience, I really want to talk about the true impact of gender discrimination. There is a lived experience that's happening that I identify with allies can't see. You haven't lived it, you don't know it, you can't bear witness. So how are you going to stop something that you can't see? So from the jump, I want to ask you two questions. One is, have you ever experienced gender discrimination?
Oh, all the time, pretty much every day, truly. And
Yeah.
I kind of sign up for it because I'm doing workshops and consultations and purposefully trying to bring some lived experience to the conversations of gender equity. And so I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a masochist, but maybe I am a little bit because I am signing up for it some of the time. But it happens in the most subtle of ways. It happens in the moment that, if it's okay for me to mention, even before we started recording,
Yeah.
where it was Mr. Was used, right? Like there are just these ways in which we've all been socialized and conditioned to just see a person, and there's this automatic reaction. Even myself, I make these mistakes too with people. I notice it when I'm writing a psychotherapy note on someone and I'm not staying present or I'm not fully awake or alert. So we all perpetrate these, and it happens a lot of the time in the realm that people are just operating from like this automatic, pretty like primal, pretty like subconscious level.
Have you ever had an ally intercept when you've experienced gender discrimination or harm?
I have, but pretty infrequently, to be honest. And I think that
Mm.
that speaks to conversations I know that we've had in the past and you've led around the bystander effect. Because oftentimes these happen, especially in like larger group settings. This happens a lot when I'm teaching, where a student will misgender me and like everyone noticed it, myself included, but no one said
Nobody
anything. We
said
just
anything.
keep moving. Like, nothing happened. But in the moments where someone has intercepted, it just feels so relieving. I feel like, oh, this person actually sees me. They actually care. Not saying that other folks who aren't saying anything don't care, because I don't want to imply that. It's just that we're all sort of waiting for someone else to take the mantle. And it can be really overwhelming. We don't know how the person's going to respond when we step in, when we correct. And we're kind of putting ourselves in harm's way. And that's what being an accomplice is.
Yeah, I love that you just used the word accomplice too, which is in so many degrees an elevated sense of allyship. In the interview with Matthew, we were talking about allyship as a construct and a badge that never existed. And allies need to just kind of remove that invisible badge and just get into their own humanity. And like
Yeah.
in a situation like that, where somebody would correct a misgender rather than leaving the room quiet while everybody notices, that's them tapping into their whole humanity. They get it, and they're just going to, step in. We also talked about the sense of being like, when you step in, it's not necessarily making like a villain out of somebody else. It's not necessarily that they were all terrible for it. It was a slip or whatnot. So I want to talk a little bit about gender-based microaggressions.
Yeah.
Around what do those look like what are people maybe missing that could be happening right beside them? Without question, the misgendering is probably super common. I know that my son, every time that we leave the house right now, he's misgendered, and a lived experience for his perspective is that he just stops. He doesn't want to leave the house. It's hard for
Yeah.
me to even say that out loud, but he doesn't want to leave the house
Yeah.
because every time he does, he faces misgendering, and nobody around him ever catches it or knows unless he's with his friends. So, what are some, I don't want to say common microaggressions, but what really comes up for you? What's happening out there?
I feel like common's the right word, not that we want
Is
to
it?
admit it,
It
right?
is. It is,
But it
isn't I
is, it's
know it
happening all
is.
the time.
Uh-huh.
And they are common. And so often, like the one that we're most familiar with really is like pronouns, which is certainly one of the most common that occurs. But it also shows up in a variety of other ways. A lot of times in the ways that trans people are denied privacy with respect to their bodies, or asked really invasive questioning about what their goals are. And that can be really overwhelming if someone's sort of just
Okay.
coming to life about being gender expansive, asking, like, what do you want to do medically, socially, legally? That's like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. I just like found one term, like, let me breathe. So a lot of times we're just subjected to a lot of really invasive questioning around like body parts, genitalia, goals for transition. And a lot of these questions reinforce some pretty harmful narratives that like medical transition is the only way to be seen as a valid trans person.
Yeah.
And as a non-binary trans human myself who hasn't undergone any medical transition, I'm just here to say that you don't have to. Though I don't know if in the future I will or will not, based on the information I have and the options available. None of it really seems to suit what I would like. Or
Mhm.
science just isn't there yet. Medicine isn't there yet for what I'd like, but it might get there. So who knows? So right now, medical transition isn't a part of my journey, and it's not a part of many people's journey. And for other people, it's the life-saving intervention that keeps them here. So there's so much space. And, I think there's also a lot that happens around like, why does it have to be about gender? Or like, why do we have to learn about this other thing? And it's like, why do we have to look at this work as taking away? We're just
Mm.
adding to the pie. We're not like removing other people's identities. We're not taking anything from you. If anything, you're gaining a lot. And the rigid gender binary that we're all forced into is harmful to everybody. And ooh, breaking news, cisgender people have genders too. So you already have one. Maybe you realize that it's not the one that's congruent with how you're actually operating in the world, and that's lovely.
Yeah.
Um, but we all have it. We're all participating, whether we want to or not, in the gender spectrum and paradigm.
Yes.
And so why not get more affiliated with like what that looks like for you so you could conceptualize what it's like for other people. So in summary, the most common ones, just really invasive questioning around people's bodies, misgendering with like pronouns and things of that nature. And also just sort of like just erasing trans people from existence, just really saying that it's like trendy or not even real.
Mm. Okay, so here's a scenario. I'm a mom, so all the mama allies out there. Um, so as a mother, one of the roles that I kick into is curiosity as a parent, right? And curiosity is a way that I show support a lot of the time by, getting into like what's going on in my kids' world, or, when I was teaching art to kids, like, curiosity about them help them feel like they belong. And that, like that's the place it would come from. And now I'm hearing this context of curiosity as it relates to gender nonconforming folks as being a microaggression. Like mind your P's and Q's or whatever that phrase is, right? Like don't be asking all of these questions. It's actually not creating an environment for this person to feel that they belong. You're ostracizing them.
Yeah. And, I kind of want to build on that because I definitely don't want any viewer to think that curiosity is a bad thing, but we want
Right.
to be thinking about like, what is your relationship to this person, right? Like also when we're talking about like racial equity work, like, are you just reaching out to a Black colleague that you never speak to because an incident happened in the news and you feel guilty as a white person? Like what's the intention behind like the curiosity, and what is your relationship to the individual? If someone very close to me asks me, my best friend, for instance, what I'm thinking about in terms of my transition, I don't consider that microaggressive. I consider that someone that cares deeply for me, making space for me to talk about an identity that's
Mhm.
important to me, and
Mhm.
makes me feel seen and whole. But when someone I've known for 5 minutes or less asks me if I've had, quote, the surgery, which viewers, there is no one, there's many. Uh, that's just so inappropriate and invasive. Like, what would it be like for me to come to a cisgender person and just start asking you about the functionality of your genitals, how it operates, how it works, what you like or don't like about it? It's just really disrespectful if you don't have that specific relationship with the person. You can
True.
have the curiosity galore. Google has a lot of images. You can
Yeah.
certainly find the things you're wanting to look for without really asking someone that you don't know information that's just none of your business.
Totally, and that's like the big message with allyship or conspiracy. Is that the word? Anyway, the dyslexia kicked in there. That's the whole angle with it, is the sense of being like, if you don't know, go find out the information. Don't put the person in front of you in charge of educating you, which is the
Yes.
same thing across all intersectional, experiences. So let's talk about the like ways that people can identify when like I feel like it's a body language thing that happens. Someone's in a situation, they're being, discriminated against based on gender. Is there any sort of cues that a gender is looking, or a gender, an ally is looking for, that can kind of, what's a tell? Is there a normal, like, I think about like, the regular sorts of things of like a body language, a slumped shoulder, or, like something going on. Is there anything there that is kind of helps guide allies to being able to identify when discrimination is happening?
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question. And I think it starts from a place of like education. Like, in order for us to sort of know really anything, we have to start sort of like learning some words and education around like what's going on within that specific marginalized community or oppressed community. So I think it starts more from a space of like learning the language of gender expansive humans, learning about transition. But to your point about subtle body language, I think anytime that a person's feeling uncomfortable or harmed, there tends to sort of be this like retreat or turn inwards as a way of self-protection. So I think if you notice that a person's really shut down, disengaged, no longer present, then it's likely that some sort of microaggression or harm occurred, which may be about gender, might not be about gender, could really
Yeah.
be about a wealth of different things.
Yeah.
But I think that those are oftentimes cues. If a person's not speaking, if they're silent, if they're staring at their feet or the floor, if they're no longer engaging in the conversation, not looking at people, not contributing, really seem like they're distant or not present. I think those are subtle cues that there's something going on here that makes the space unbearable for that person and
Yeah.
makes it incapable for them to show up entirely and fully as themselves.
Yeah. In the experience of my son, what it was is it was in a lineup to get on the bus, and the bus driver had looked at the name on his ticket and then looked at him and said, "You're not a boy," to him, and just like pulled into himself completely and totally. But he got really quiet because he still needed to communicate with the
Yeah.
bus driver. He needed to defend himself essentially, but he was really freaked out to do it because he didn't want to escalate it. Meanwhile, there's people in the lineup behind him, right? So he's like trying to like not make eye contact, but like talk quietly with him and just be in this situation because he in that moment the whole world stopped. He was at the front of the line. It was, line wasn't moving because of this situation. And in that body language is just such a tell, right? And I like that you brought up that it's not always gender based, right? Microaggressions aren't always, and it doesn't even, I think, in a moment need to be identified as any particular allotted discrimination. There's that humanity piece of coming in and just being able to say, like, something ain't right. Let's
Yeah.
removes from the situation, de-escalate, which is something that we talk about in another interview, but stepping in to do something's not right.
Yeah. It's like turning to intuition.
Oh,
Something's
good point.
not right here.
Yeah.
We have been conditioned in this capitalist world to reject intuition. That's not knowledge, right? Or at least that's what we're told. But it is knowledge. Intuition is our deepest sense of knowledge. Oftentimes, the gut, where most people consider their intuition to be held, is known as like the wise mind. In many indigenous cultures and many other spaces, like that is the place of true knowing or truth telling, is turning to that intuition. So embodying full humanity is like a journey towards that like intuitive self, and just noticing the landscape, what's happening around you, being attuned to your body, being physically present, noticing so much more than just what's being said, but what's actually happening.
What came through for me right there was a sense of like a permission slip. Allies don't need to know everything about a particular situation in order to reduce harm. You don't have to speak full gender discrimination in order to prevent it, or at least interrupt the pattern of it. You don't have to have a full understanding of, intersectional discrimination. Let's talk about that for a second too. So you've got somebody who's experiencing gender discrimination and they're also a person of color and they're also disabled. Like that weight is just even more burdensome. And not that one isn't heavy and three is heavier. I don't mean to say it in that context, but it's just like broader. There's just a lot more that can go on there. What about I want to ask about the lived experience, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of, it could be your own personal story, just from your sort of professional experiences. What is the byproduct of these sorts of experiences of harm and rejection, particularly in public, which is kind of more what we're talking about? What is a gender non-conforming, transgender, non-binary person? What are they internalizing in these experiences?
Yeah. And, I also want to, because I think sometimes this like can turn into like just a trans people experience, like any gendered being, including people who have privilege, there are consequences to misgendering and other harm as it relates to gender, right? And I sometimes find in this conversation that like cis women in particular feel excluded, and they certainly experience gender-based discrimination. So I try to find ways of also including others and not just making it a conversation of like trans and non-binary and
Lovely.
gender non-conforming people. But the reality here is that like when we experience harm, and we're right now just talking mostly about gender, but when you happen to have that experience day in and day out, it cuts away at you. It makes you feel like you shouldn't exist. And so, like, in its like most extreme forms, like folks experience suicidality. They don't want to live anymore. This year in particular has been really tough, if I'm being fully honest, as a therapist. And there's been many moments in which I've asked myself, do I even want to be a therapist anymore? Can I be a therapist anymore? Because the onslaught of legislation here, at least in the US, but
Yeah.
also globally,
Yeah.
against any person who is not a cis man has just been horrific and terrible. And who wants to live in a world where you're not allowed to exist fully? And essentially, that's what legislation is saying. You shouldn't exist. You don't exist. We're going to erase you. And so when you tell a person that based on whatever identity they possess, and this can certainly translate to other identity sets that are oppressed, a person
Mhm.
doesn't want to live. They're going to feel depressed. They're going to dissociate. They might have psychosis. They will go crazy. And I have a lack of other words, because truly, if you are saying, no, I'm here, I'm real, and everybody else is saying, no, you're not, that's enough to drive a person mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
the experience that so many non-cis men are experiencing, cis women included, gender expansive people, trans people, is I am not allowed to exist. I'm told I don't exist. And therefore, I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm scared of being hurt, not being able to access things that make me feel fully myself. And maybe I just shouldn't live anymore.
Mm. The range of it, right? That's that million paper cuts that people associate with it. It's a language that I know allies can use quite freely. Is microaggressions are like a million death by paper cut, but
Yeah.
that's the context of it. And I'll go back to the example of my son who just doesn't really want to leave the house.
Yeah.
Like going to the market is like, he's early in his transition. He chose to go slow. It's good for his mental health on that capacity. But as long as he's not out in our small town where everybody misgenders him, and that's that range, that scope of experience.
Yeah, and the range of experience can be like also really like wild. For instance, just today, started the day, and it was like what, 8 o'clock in the morning. A woman that I'm assuming is a woman, I didn't ask her gender. Here I am putting a she on this person, asked me where I got my dress and told me I looked really fabulous and fierce and was super lovely. And then I got on the train and somebody started pointing at me and laughing. So in like in minutes, you can have a range of people really affirming you, making you feel really good about yourself. And then moments later, someone like taking pictures of you and laughing. Which is microaggressive and harmful.
Of course.
So even in spaces where you would think people are more progressive, I'm in New York City, that's not always the case. And like people can have experiences of gender euphoria and then dysphoria within seconds.
Mm. So this had me thinking right there was this sense that allyship in itself can be really thought of as a binary sense. You're doing it well, you're doing it bad. You're focusing, like how are you being a good ally kind of thing. But I just want to kind of have a quick chat about being a positive ally. Like you're out in the world and are you um uplifting gender non-conforming or other genders around you. This could women to women, whatever it may be, but because we're focusing on gender discrimination here, like more people celebrating your dress and how as fierce as you are. Is that a role that allies can and should be playing out here more, as being more vocal about you know gender expressions beyond their own?
Absolutely. I mean, a compliment is so easy. It's so simple and we all love them. Um, hate, that is not easy. That takes energy and it comes at an expense. Like a compliment you offer to another person also fills up your cup. You feel good about offering kindness and joy to another person, and they feel good about receiving it. But when we espouse harmful things, we're taking from our own capacity and also ripping from other people too. So just a simple compliment can really go a long way. Who knows? That might be the one thing that makes a person who's on the edge of deciding to complete suicide or not, making the decision, actually, someone saw me today and
Yeah.
I am real and I should keep living.
Yes, yes. What came through for me, and I can feel other people kind of going to this place too, is a sense of allyship guilt of like I shouldn't feel good for complimenting somebody else. Like it shouldn't fill my cup. I should be doing it all for them, you know? But there's, again, in my view, is taking out the humanity of it, is you want somebody else to feel the way you feel, right? That you want compliments when you're out and about looking fierce. So give them forward. I think that there's also maybe a little piece of, I know I felt this before when I see just an absolutely fierce gender nonconforming person out in the world, is if I compliment them, am I drawing attention to them? And is that maybe uncomfortable? Like, is it better for them to just exist and not have, oh, great, someone's got to bring up gender again or whatnot? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, I think that this also speaks to like how we intervene in instances of microaggressions too. Like be brief, be intentional,
Be real.
right? And be real. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
if you're going to come up to someone and then you're going to compliment them and then you're going to try to like make a big deal about it, like I would kind of question whether or not that's like totally real, honest, and valid. Like if someone's going to come up to me and say like, your dress is fabulous, and starts like yelling at passersby, like, look at this person, look at their dress, aren't they amazing? I think that's a little bit too much. Like, let's tone it down because you don't know, that could be really dangerous to
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
someone on blast like that. But be real, be intentional, be brief,
Be kind.
be kind.
Yeah. It's so simple in the end, right? But I like that this conversation took that went down that direction of like offering compliments and just allowing it to just exist, come and go. I see a world where we just stop talking about binary. Like I find I've posted about this before, where it just becomes a conversation that's like, get it out of your head. Like binary as a cross so many things is just boring in my opinion. It lacks creativity. It just puts people in a box, whether it's gender or whatever construct it is. And I see us getting to a place, especially because the younger generations are coming up and forcing it, if you will, that it's not going to be as much friction there, between, ooh, or what, are you trans, or ooh, like whatever it happens to be. It's like it's a human being, move on kind of thing.
And yeah, this also speaks to a larger conversation around like power, which
Mm,
is like the purpose of binaries and like the reason why they exist is to hoard power. Because if you say there's one thing and another thing and nothing in between, then it's easier to create legislation that controls one and puts another in power. And
yeah.
that's why we see so much of the legislation that we do now across the globe, is that many folks are calling for the removal of these binary perspectives because they're not real in the first place. They were created with the purpose of control. And then people in control are like, oh, fuck, we won't be able to control people anymore
Right.
if we don't
Right.
have these explicit categories.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say curse words, so oops.
It's my world, always, always. That's how I roll. Yeah.
Keeping it real.
So true, though. So true. Okay. This has been really awesome, Nyx. Just thank you so much for sharing these perspectives, offering a bit of context around microaggressions, around the lived experiences, and fundamentally around normalizing like gender like non-binary, you know, like normalizing that it's just it's a part of our world, and it doesn't have to be I want to say discriminated against, but as allies, the role is to reduce harm. That's the task. If you're going to sign up for it, that's what you're going to do. You're going to put yourself at risk. And thank you for sharing this conversation with us to sort of encourage that context for folks.
Definitely.
So you can find Nyx's info all around this event when their book comes out. Oh my gosh, I'll give it away for sure. Write that book. I want to see it.
I'll have to put some time aside to get going on that.
Awesome. Thanks, friend.
Thank you.